This is a video in which we'll appear to be talking about one thing, but really we're talking about another. What this video is really about is outlining the core curriculum for mastering Chinese folk magic.
Xunzi was a philosopher during the Warring States period, circa 313 to 238 BCE. He's one of the great philosophers from the Ruzha or Confucian school of thought.
There's this eponymous text, Xunzi, that's a collection of essays on, well, everything: ethics, philosophy, political science, language arts, and cosmology.
In that eponymous text, there's an essay titled The Royal System, or put in terms that's perhaps more understandable today, the branches of government, governing bodies. The list begins with the Minister of State Ceremonies, then the Minister of Civic Affairs, the Minister of War, a Minister of Cultural Affairs, and for each office, Xunzi describes its role and responsibilities. And Xunzi names 15 branches or bureaus of government, ending with the one who oversees them all, the Son of Heaven, Tianwang, the head of state. Now, one of these in particular is of great interest to us magically inclined folk. The 10th office listed is the Minister of Oracles, the chief among the Shamans. Considering how this officer's duties are described, we could say this is the Minister of Oracles, translating Wu to diviner, the oracle.
You could even make the argument that this translates to Minister of Magic, as that title more fully encapsulates everything this particular government official is in charge of for the kingdom.
This Minister of Oracles is charged with 5 key responsibilities, and one of those 5 makes reference to the 5 mystical arts. So by cross-reference, that's 10, because the Minister of Oracles must also be skilled in the 5 mystical arts.
Why this excerpted passage from 300 BC is so notable is how it presents a pretty good checklist of the core skills in Chinese folk magic, and is therefore a structural foundation and defining framework for how you might want to approach learning and mastering the way or the Tao of the Wu.
像阴阳
The first of the 5 skills to master, to read the omens of yin and yang. Xiang, this is face reading, the art of identifying the implications of a particular physical form or attribute. Yin-Yang, yin and yang, are you able to identify and understand the interplay between the dynamic forces in this universe that cause all change?
Chinese cosmology asserts that at the most fundamental level, our reality is nothing more than patterns of electrical signals of zeros and ones in binary. Everything you see, hear, sense, all seasonal phenomena and earthly formations are 8-bit values, the Ba Gua, 8 trigrams, consisting of the binary yin and yang. And so while most lay people are focused on the superficial of what they're seeing, hearing, and sensing, you, assuming you are to be a minister of oracles, are able to see the binary 8-bit values of reality, what reality is at its most fundamental level. The foundation of accurate divination and powerful manifestation work is the ability to read the forms of yin and yang. This is another way of saying pattern recognition.
How foundational is this first concept, being able to divine and spot patterns at this binary level? Onyodo, a Japanese form of divination, developed 800 years after the writings of Xunzi. It is both philosophy and practice, premised on the axiom of as above, so below, and so it reconciles yin-yang observations of the heavens, astrology, and of the earth, the formations and movements of nature in our environment. Under the umbrella of this first line is also yin-yang shu, a term you've encountered if you've read either of my books, The Tao of Craft or I Ching, the Oracle. It's essentially a catch-all term meaning the occult arts. According to lore, Zhou Tianquanyu, the Lady of the 9 Heavens, teaches Yin-Yang Shu, the occult arts, to the Yellow Emperor, and that's the lineage of mystery tradition we inherit today.
Which is to say that the most fundamental core skill of the magician is to see beyond appearances and the 5 physical senses, to read the yin-yang binary code of every phenomenon. When we say you're doing divination or reading signs and omens, at least in Chinese folk magic, which over the centuries we see many other parts of East Asia adopt and integrate, what you're doing is identifying the exact binary code of of the phenomenon so that you can either fully understand its programming or so you can reprogram the phenomenon.
Let's rephrase number 1 to observing yin and yang. And now for skill number 2.
占近照
To divine omens and therefore avert disaster. Zhan means to divine, to foretell, to prognosticate by interpreting the signs and omens, again, pattern recognition. Jingzhao means to be able to see when the cracks in the tortoise shell or oracle bone show signs warning of calamity, though generally the phrase, these two words together, just means omens of good or bad fortune. Zhao is a reference to oracle bone and tortoise shell divination. Even the Chinese character for this word looks like the cracked bones and shells used for this divination method. So you must be able to read the patterns of yin and yang and know what patterns of yin and yang mean. Knowing how to observe yin and yang then empowers you to anticipate and forecast what is to happen next, to divine omens and avert disaster. The third of the 5 core skills.
钻龟辰卦
Cast hexagrams with the tortoise shells. Gui refers to tortoise shell divination, though later evolved into using moon blocks rather than actual tortoise shells or animal bones. By the way, note how each skill builds on the previous. Both 2 and 3 make reference to the oracle bone and tortoise shell divination methods of the shaman. Speaking of tortoises, we've already talked about the mythological significance of the tortoise as a divine messenger of the mystical arts. Gua can mean hexagram, but it can also mean trigram, and that specific character used in 3 relates back to the character for divination in 2. Gua in general means the divinatory casting result, the change forecasted, and can you use tools to accurately, meaningfully capture that change? There's a deeper meaning embedded in 3. Cracking the tortoise shell is a metaphor, a figure of speech for intense study and therefore mastery of the sacred methods, the mysteries, because the tortoise is a symbol of the mysteries. And so, 钻龟辰卦 also means to know the sacred methods, to know the divine mysteries.
Chinese occultism is perhaps difficult at the beginner level, but I promise you, truly, of all the occult technologies I've studied, it's actually the easiest of them all, once you get a sense for the foundational principles. So yes, you do need to go through that very boring, nerdy, doesn't feel magical at all study phase of really learning everything there is to know about yin-yang theory, the 8 trigrams, the 5 changing phases in the Luoshu magic square. And if you master use of the I Ching, oof, unstoppable. What can't you do with your command over the unseen? Once you know basic doctrine backward and forward, I promise you, Chinese occultism is the easiest of the magical systems to work with. Why? Because of its consistency. The same core rules, the periodic table of Chinese magic, if you will, applies to anything and everything in this ecosystem of mystical practice. Oracle bone and tortoise shell divination from 3,000 years ago was premised on superimposing a 9-sector grid, reading different cracks or formations classified as wood, fire, earth, metal, or water, and understanding the yin-yang attributes. The earliest forms of Chinese astrology and the I Ching are based on this exact system. Feng Shui, even as we practice it today, follows this logic. If you've ever watched ceremonial rites and Taoist rituals, it's based on this doctrinal foundation. That was a bit of a tangent. Back on track.
As the minister of oracles, you're to be proficient at studying and observing the patterns of yin and yang, so that you can divine omens by using divination methods such as the tortoise shells to read the trigrams and hexagrams. We are now on to the 4th of the 5 core skills of the shamans and witches.
主禳则无补
Expel harm with the 5 arts. There's an implication here that divination and the magical arts are closely connected. The Wu here means the 5 divinatory signs, but it also means the 5 mystical arts. Here's what we know about this term, wubu, used in its historical and cultural context. It was referring to the 5 classifications of cracks that can form during oracle bone or tortoise shell divination, and the 5 classifications correspond to the 5 movements or 5 dynamic phases of change. Per the cosmological beliefs of the time, any phenomenon in this universe corresponds with one of these 5 classifications, and another one of the 5 can defeat it or mitigate the damage that could potentially be done by the calamity predicted by the 5 forms. And so these 5 became the 5 controls over the 5 forms. And so our best interpretation of this 4th skill is that the master of oracles must be able to not only divine which of the 5 forms of disaster is prophesied, but also know the 5 arts for warding each of the 5 forms of disaster. There's another interpretation of this line cross-referencing into a popular expression of the mystical arts, wu shu. The 5 mystical arts are spiritual cultivation, be that so you possess command over occult powers or so you can transcend and be one with the Tao, channeling divinity, study of forms and appearances, study of fate, and the healing arts. There are many subset practices under these 5 categories, such as talisman and sigil crafting, mediumship and channeling, feng shui, palmistry, or face reading, astrology and bazi for pillars analysis, or herbology and traditional Chinese medicine.
Which is to say, the minister of oracles, also the Wu, not just divines, but once the divination has been received, can and is expected to perform rituals or spells to ward off disaster or mitigate the harms of misfortune. Basically, you gotta be witchy. Are you able to thwart disaster with magic and, well, witchcraft? Oh, and there's yet a 3rd interpretation of this line, and even if it's not true to this Xunzi text, it's true to a folk belief. 5 is the maximum number of times you can do a divinatory reading on a question before you piss off the gods and ancestors. You can permissibly do a divinatory reading for the same question up to 3 times. Everybody, including the spirit world, understands you need your due diligence and to be super, super sure. But 5, you're starting to ruffle some feathers. So applying that maxim to this line, it could be saying that a competent shaman or witch will be able to do what they've got to do in under 5 magical tries.
On screen is a reference table that lists out the 5 mystical arts, oft cited and canonically recognized in Taoist mysticism and across the Chinese folk magical traditions. To me, this reads like a curriculum for introduction to Chinese folk magic, and really arguably with a lot of direct relevance in many other East Asian traditions of folk magic. The bullet points listed along the right side of the screen are the specific specialties or areas of specialization.
My toxic tiger mom or tiger big sister trait is I think you should take what I just showed on screen as a checklist of what you want to study and master, if you're serious about being a practitioner of Chinese folk magic.
And finally, skill number 5.
知其吉凶夭祥
Discerning the auspicious and the inauspicious. These characters emphasized on screen should be familiar to anyone working closely with the I Ching. I mean, I have a whole section in my book just focused on these 2 characters. And so these 5 skills we covered tells us that the minister of oracles can identify whether a form is to be characterized as yin or yang, and then through divination be able to assess whether that yin-yang characterization is auspicious or inauspicious. To cultivate these skills for yourself, there is no better place to start than with the I Ching.
There is one final significant point Xunzi makes about shamans or witches, shamanic witches. You're born this way, and you'll bear the physical markings of this identity.
Such are the affairs of the minister of oracles, marked with this calling through physical deformities.
And for context, let's zoom out to look at other comments Xunzi has said. We're going to look at another chapter, different section, and here in this passage, Xunzi is making an analogy. He's talking about the cruel, tyrannical, and corrupt last ruler of the Xia dynasty, and also the cruel, tyrannical, and corrupt last ruler of the Shang dynasty. He's making a comparison and saying they are
like the deformed shamans who fancy themselves wise.
Without the implied cultural context, this might be a bit hard to follow. Those who are born with prescient knowledge, able to harness unseen forces, the occult, well, according to philosophers like Xunzi, they fall into two camps. One, the upright, moral, humble types who are scholarly, learned, and who modestly pursue spiritual cultivation. And two, the deformed shamans. They tend to be arrogant. They still have the gift, just like the first type, but perhaps they're morally gray characters. In the passage we were looking at earlier, extracting the five core skills, Xunzi acknowledges that shamans have an official role in the government system. He recognizes that they possess power, can divine, communicate with spirits, read omens, and access unseen forces. But he's also quite critical of shamans, witches, and sorcerers. These are not figures who are respected by proper society, but proper society tolerates them because, on some level, they acknowledge that these shamans, witches, sorcerers, or ministers of the oracle are needed. Citing from Xunzi when my work tends to be Taoist is an interesting choice. That's because this particular philosopher can be a polarizing figure due to perhaps his most famous and notable philosophical assertion.
人之性恶，
Humanity's nature is inherently selfish. Put an asterisk on that last word, because it's more often translated as evil. But what do you mean by evil?
To set this up, let's talk about the polarity. Xunzi is asserting this declaration: humanity is inclined toward evil, or humans are selfish and self-serving, in direct response to another famous philosopher, Mencius, and Xunzi is throwing shade at Mencius.
人之性善，
Humanity's nature is inherently benevolent. This last character in this context is translated to good. The quote comes from Mengzi, Mencius, a 4th century Confucian philosopher. However, we've got to address what we mean when we say good versus evil. The polarity is presented as shan, which to simplify we translate as good, and its opposite, evil. But when we say good, we mean non-interference, to abide by the doctrines of ziran and wu-wei. And when we say the polarity of that, we mean to interfere, to manipulate, to force against another's nature, to impose your will over divine will or natural will.
The philosopher Mencius espoused that people are inherently good. The reason we see humans wanting to cultivate virtue and instill morality is because we're inherently good. It is in our nature to want to be compassionate and generous and to be of service to others. It's true, the pain and suffering and the toils of the mortal world corrupts us and pollutes that inner purity. So, education and cultivation of virtue are about keeping that pollution at bay, to undo the corruption, and to let us be our true selves, which is pure and kind and toward divinity. Xunzi then comes along and is like, oh my god, this Mencius guy, Delulu. Xunzi is perhaps most famous for criticizing Mencius and saying, oh no, humans are inherently evil. We are selfish, self-serving, and if left to our own devices, would be violent, cruel, lazy, greedy, and immoral. In fact, Xunzi says that what Mencius observes as good in humanity is just performative. By nature, we are profit-driven, selfish, competitive, greedy, and also cowards. We don't stand up for justice if it might hurt us. And because of this evil nature of ours, we inflict cruelty and harm. Xunzi goes on to say that the only way to correct or straighten our innately selfish and evil nature in humans is for there to be teachers and rulers, strict authority figures.
In Chinese theories of magic, it's also binary, and we can apply the Mengzi versus Xunzi discourse to explain it. Applying this binary, there are two archetypes of magic. One approach begins from the premise that your true will is not separate from divine will. You are a conduit, not a controller. Magic here is about flowing with the forces, aligning harmoniously with what heaven is already unfolding. It is pious, normative, and oriented toward the greater good. Power moves through you because you are in accord with 自然 and 无为. By contrast, Xunzian philosophy applied to magic assumes your true will is personal will. You are the engineer of manifestation. Magic becomes the manipulation of forces, the structuring of energy, the control of chaos to produce a desired outcome. It is transgressive, willful, and often oriented toward personal gain.
We've noted how Xunzi basically looks down on the Wu or shamans, witches, and sorcerers, and interestingly enough, it aligns with his philosophical outlook. Like it all kind of checks out. I think in Xunzi's mind, the shamans, witches, and sorcerers are the ultimate embodiment of human nature when endowed with unchecked power. Or put another way, these sorts of abilities outlined in the 5 core skills and 5 mystical arts magnify what's innate, which Xunzi thinks is evil. So external constraints, including social stigma, are needed to keep these types of people in check. There will be a companion blog post and written materials to supplement this video. So if this subject is of interest to you, definitely be sure to check it out. Link in the video description box. And if you want to collect resources and educational materials on everything outlined in that 5 core skills, 5 mystical arts checklist, like their Pokemon, be sure to subscribe to this channel and stay tuned.